All right, let's get started.
Okay. So this is the couple that we've done previously. We've discussed previously and listened to an enactment um, with the female,
Mm-hmm.
and so I saw them recently and did an enactment. And when I listened again to the recording, which is what I love about listening to recordings, so I did an enactment in about 1 hour. And when I listened to the recording, I did the enactment. I was picking up on pain. And then when I listened to the recording, and I want to play it for you, so I can get your feedback. I missed much like earlier on. So at about 49 minutes, I missed guilt. And then a few minutes, 5 minutes later, I missed fear, and then I actually did an enactment with hurt. But I had the feeling, when I really thought about it, that I think in this situation, the guilt was a big thing. And what it was about was they were they get into the cycle around their divorce agreements, and the man not wanting to share his divorce agreement with the wife, and not the wife, sorry, the girlfriend. And so after our former session that we discussed, he did share the divorce agreement with her. And so we discussed that because they got into a cycle of argument about it. Um, because she reacted by saying that the that your ex-wife settlement was nowhere near as big as mine, or sorry, was a lot bigger than mine. Hers was a lot bigger than mine. And so he was upset by that.
When she says then mine, is she talking about just from her previous relationship or?
Yeah, so her
Yeah,
divorce.
okay.
Yeah, so
Sure.
her divorce. So she said that, her settlement was a lot larger than mine. Mine was nowhere near that big. Um, which which hurt him. And we sort of talked about that and the fact that that was her reaction. When instead of saying, well, thank you for sharing this with me, which is what he talked about, she could have said, well, thank you for sharing it with me. I really appreciate that. But instead, she said that. And then she said, yeah, but what about a lot of these other things that you haven't done that I'd asked you to do? And so he talked about how um, that really bothers him, that instead of validating what he has done, um, there there's all this list of other things that he hasn't done yet.
Mhm.
And so this session actually I thought was a lot better simply because they were physically together in the same room this time. And before they were in different places. And I noticed a
Yeah,
huge difference because they were physically sitting beside each other and I could
mhm.
feel the energy between them. It was a huge difference. And
Absolutely,
so
yeah.
I now ask them if they can please always be together for sessions, because she had said
Mhm.
that recently the other night they weren't going to. They hummed and hawed about it because they were arguing and they were talking about breaking up. And they didn't really know if they wanted to be beside each other.
Mhm.
But then they decided to share the space, and it made a lot of difference. I could feel the connection between them. So
Okay.
yeah, that was really interesting,
Mhm.
because I sometimes some of my other couples that do have done it in different locations, and
Yeah.
it's quite different.
Yeah, if you can, if sometimes it's not possible, but yeah, if they can, of course, it'll make a difference.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a
so I
difference.
just wanted to ask you about two parts.
Mhm.
The first one was you said missed guilt. So I just wanted you to talk a little bit more about that. It sounded like, you were describing it as a mistake, or can you just kind of open that up a little bit?
Well, what were you talking about? He was talking about, oh, again, he was talking about the divorce agreement. his own divorce agreement and the settlement. And he talked about how he felt, and I totally missed it. He said, I feel guilty about my wealth. And I have tried to keep things from her so that she doesn't feel hurt, or she doesn't feel like, I think he was trying to say, so she doesn't feel like I'm any better than her, right? He felt guilty about his wealth because he had a lot more than she did. And
Right.
he didn't want her to feel bad. And so that was why he had kept
Right.
the divorce agreement and a lot of things in the divorce agreement from her, because he said he'd pretty much given his ex-wife everything. And he felt guilty about that. And not about that, but he felt guilty about his wealth. And he felt guilty about the fact that since then, it's been a few years, and he hasn't been able to sort of reaccumulate enough wealth to do the things for her that he wanted to do, like to buy a house and do all these things, because he was still kind of recovering from that agreement.
Mhm.
And he felt guilty
Right.
about that.
Yeah. So I think similarly to what I talked to Kaja about last time, you want to be careful in stage one in globalizing, um, and not tying it into the current cycle. So if you're gonna go into guilt, you really want to talk about how does it come up in a particular moment, in a particular cycle, right?
So
As
we,
opposed to just over the last 2 years.
yeah. So we were talking about the divorce agreement because she said that he showed it to her on his laptop, but he kept scrolling through it really fast. And so she didn't get a chance to read it properly. And he said he was trying to hide things from her because he felt guilt about his wealth. He didn't want her to really see all the numbers. So
Mhm.
I don't know if that was in the moment or if that was more global.
Yeah,
It
that
was
would be
global.
in the moment. Yeah, so that's the specific instance where it came up. Um, and then where I think you would want to take it is you want to go underneath it, because guilt is something that, um, is it part of their current cycle, or is it part of this new cycle they're trying to create, right? I might I might think that it's part of their current cycle, right? Because he's acting out of guilt and hiding it. Guilt
Mhm.
makes it, you know what I mean? That's already what he's showing. It's not to say that it can't be helpful to make it explicit, because um, he might be pulling away and hiding, and she might not know it's out of guilt. So as a first level expression, it could be helpful, but you also want to go underneath it, right? Because there's what's driving the guilt, right? What primary feeling is driving the guilt? And it's going to be, maybe sadness or something like that. And so you want to bring that in to the surface. That's going to be responded to much better than, because guilt is not typically something that you're going to consistently get a good response from the
Yeah.
partner.
So you need to go
And so that,
underneath it and find
yeah,
the
you keep,
emotions underneath it.
yeah. And it's not so much the word that matters as much, because one person might be saying guilt, but actually the experiencing sadness in front of you, right? And in that case, that's okay. Although the words might not be congruent with, and it might confuse her because he might be displaying sadness, but using the word guilt. So in terms of congruence, you're going to get the highest likelihood of a good response from her if you get the sadness that comes to the surface. And again, it doesn't have to be the word sadness. It could just be sadness with a congruent word, right? Like what's happening in your body, right? Like these kinds of sensory words as well can be really effective, because what she's seeing is what's important, not what the word that comes up, unless the word ends up being contradictory to what it is that he's displaying, then it can become confusing for the receiver. So I wouldn't say it's a bad thing to miss guilt. I would say maybe there's a missed opportunity in going under. And then if you go under and you get to really feel what it is that he's describing and allowing that to come to the surface, that could be a good opportunity for an enactment, because that'll be part of their new cycle you're trying to create. And when that situation, for example, was to come up again, instead of hiding the laptop, he might then go and be able to express what's happening in the moment, which then can open up a dialogue. And she can, her old cycle and insecurities don't come up because he's describing, and that could be a good bonding moment, and a good, as opposed to an escalating moment, it can be one of mutual understanding. Or even the idea that a week ago we fought about this, now we're able to talk about it. That's a kind of growing. Stage one again is about we call it de-escalation. And so the idea is we're trying to not get triggered. We're trying to, when we get triggered, we're able to repair, right? We're trying to understand each other. We're trying to, the train's derailing, we're coming back on the right track, that kind of thing. That's stage one.
Okay. Yeah, because she was suggesting that he didn't need to show it to her, that he could just give it to her and she could read the whole thing. And
that's her coping. Yeah. And that's that's the cycle, right? You can plug that behavior in the same way you can plug his behavior into the current cycle, right? That's the current cycle playing out. It would be so much easier if he would just give you the whatever you're asking for, right? But would that really satisfy the underlying driver? No, because then you're still going to be unconsciously looking for the next thing he's hiding from you, and that'll overlap with your insecurity, your attachment insecurity. So it's not going to matter. It'll just buy you some time. But what will really help heal is if you can actually express to him what's going on for you, and have him be able to respond to that. And then, right, that's going to reassure the insecurity and reinforce you coming to him more often with that when it comes out.
so it's almost like the wanting the password to your phone, wanting to know where you are. It's the same idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's
coping,
but it's not an answer.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and then that's just the opportunity to go underneath that behavior for her. Those behaviors, those are just like the action tendencies. It's the comfortable way to indirectly get those needs met, but they're not direct, and they just reinforce the current cycle, and so that's what makes it problematic. But of course, it makes sense. You validate. It makes sense why you would do that. Of course, yeah, of course, it would just do that. It would make you feel like he's not hiding and he's transparent, and there's an underlying driver there for her as well.
He
The other piece that you had mentioned. Oh yeah, no, go ahead. To finish this part off.
he would still be feeling the pain though if she was reading it, knowing she was reading it, right?
Exactly, and that's why it's sometimes we refer to them as like win-lose situations, right? It's win-lose because in the short term it's win for one and lose for the other, but in the long run it's always lose-lose, because that energy gets built up and that resentment gets built up. And so unless we have a win-win, it's lose-lose. There's no in between, right?
Yeah.
It just gets, that energy just gets carried over, and that belief from that moment about the other person gets carried over, and or the current not helpful belief that isn't really true, because all we see as the coping gets kind of more and more solidified, which is also not helpful. Yeah. And then the other piece is the statement she had made around me getting less than your ex, and I think that's also an opportunity. You said that hurt him. Well, I can see different routes to how it hurt him, but you want to open that up, right? Like when she says that in the moment, whether she said it at home or if she says it in session, and even better if she says it in session, and you see a reaction from him, that's a live emotion, right? That's a live, he's not even probably caught up to what's happening. He's just reacting. That's a great opportunity to go into that and ask him, like, what do you hear from that, right? Like, get him to express what is it that he's interpreting that's leading to that hurt.
Okay.
That's good opportunity there.
Okay.
Instead of just going with, it's, what you said hurt him, which is only part of the story.
Okay. Okay.
So each of these are like little entry points, little triggers that you can expand on for them.
In the moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So can I play my enactment or the enactment?
Yeah.
Or the pain that you felt about the whole thing.
Yes.
Can you tell her that?
I did not know, because I didn't think it would go anywhere.
Can you tell her right now? Can you tell her that it makes you feel that way? It brings back the pain.
Can you actually go back maybe about 30 seconds or before the enactment, just to kind of assess was it hot, as to the language we used last time? Was it ready to be transferred over? Based on his response, it doesn't seem like it so far.
Made a bad decision. So now you're saying I made a bad decision by being with you, having an affair with you, and it was my poor planning. You should have done all these things. To me, that's manipulation. That's her emotionally blackmailing me. Like I don't feel good about that either.
So when you heard her make that comment, it just sort of brought back a lot of the pain that you felt about the whole thing.
Yes.
Can you tell her that?
I did not know.
Can you pause? Yeah, I think the reflection was good. I think it was a good first step to get him deeper, right? He acknowledged, yep, but it wasn't like, yeah, I'm feeling it. So once you get the yep, what's that like? Can you talk to me about what that pain is like? Open it up. Before you pass it over, it really needs to be felt in the room. If you can't feel it, then his head is acknowledging there's pain. And pain is a good, it's a good first level ambiguous sort of word for primary emotion. It's a good starting point because as a conjecture, you're not really ever wrong, right? By saying pain, it's very general, right? Yeah, it's painful. It doesn't speak to how much pain or any of that. So it's a good hook to, if you're lost, you can usually use the word pain because, right, even people that are not going to be very like emotionally literate, pain is pain, right? Whether it's physical or emotional. But it's a starting point. It's not a place where if you just get an acknowledgement around, yes, this is painful, that's not enough to do an enactment, right? It's just a very starting point. Yeah. So I'd like to see you really open it up. If you get a yes to an emotional word, then you go, okay, well, can you feel that pain? Or can you talk to me about that pain? What is that pain like, right? Otherwise you made a request and he didn't even hear your request, right? You just kept going because he's not connected to his amygdala right now. He's just really, and if he is, he's connected to his amygdala, but it's not safe to be there. And so what he does is he'll go into coping mode and go into whatever his secondary behavior is, because it's not safe to stay there. Yeah.
Okay.
You want to make it really safe to be in his amygdala, to feel into his amygdala, because the whole idea of an enactment is we want to make it safe and to be triggered and yet feel like you can turn to your partner and use them as an attachment resource, so that that's going to be the thing that's going to bring me down and have me be soothed. And really, even better than that, into stage 2 is it's going to heal my childhood. It's going to heal how I present to the world, how I see myself, how I see others. But at first, of course, it's more of just, I feel like I can stay there and share with my partner as opposed to cope. That's like the first stage.
So I needed to stay with that more first.
You have to deepen it. Yeah. It's not hot if you're just getting a cognitive acknowledgement that something's painful, but it's a start. It's a starting point. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you're saying you're in 50 minutes or an hour, however long you're in, what was going on in the first hour of that session?
They were talking about pretty much the same thing, and but she would sometimes go into other things like household duties and things like that, and sort of diverge into other things, and then I would bring them back um, to, because that seemed to be the biggest issue for them at the time, was this, the the divorce agreement, and what
Yeah.
what the ex-wife got, what the girlfriend didn't get from
Yeah.
hers, and yeah, it's
Yeah.
very
Well,
hot.
both are content. So when you say bring them back, what are you bringing them back to?
I was just bringing her back from the household things, like he'll take his dish and he'll just put it on the dishwasher instead of
Yeah.
putting it in the dishwasher.
Right. So what I would say is, think of the anchor as not one piece of content over another. Both are good entry points. The chores, that's an entry point for her. It represents a lot, as does the money piece, right? But when you think bringing them back, I want you to think of, you're bringing them back to the moment that they're talking about, the actual moment. What is the moment? What are we talking about? That's the entry point, right? So whether the moment happened earlier in the week or whether the moment happened 5 minutes ago, we're bringing them back to the moment, right? We can validate about the new content that they're coming up with. We can kind of put it in its place, like, oh, like, so validate or put it in its place, meaning like, oh, when we talk about this, it's hard, and it makes you want to talk about something else, right? But kind of help focusing, right? You're helping organize both what's happening to them, and also what is it that we're doing here. We're working on this process of uh, picking one moment in time and going really deep into it. And that's where we want to spend the majority of the session. So then when you're priming them with that information, that this is what we're doing here, right? We're going to pick one moment, right? Now, that's not to say we can't be flexible. We do need to be flexible, especially when in the moment right now they're getting triggered. We want to move away from something that's not as alive, meaning the story from earlier this week. It might not be resolved, but it's not as alive as what's happening in the room right now. When there's something alive in the room right now, we tend to want to follow that instead, because it's what's happening. It's what they're experiencing right now, right here, right now. It's so they're going to be more attached, more able to connect to what's happening in the moment.
So if she quickly moves into household duties, then that's the moment I should.
Well, what's your focus in that moment? Let me ask you that. Are you working with him in that moment? And then
No,
she's talking about household duties, or what's your goal in that particular moment?
she was responding to him talking about um, the divorce
What are you
agreement.
doing? What are you doing in that moment? What's your mission?
Um, I was trying to focus on the divorce agreement and the feelings coming out of the situation that they had after our last session, when he showed her um, that he was willing to show her the divorce agreement, and he did. And that
You
was
said
what I was.
the feelings coming out of it for who?
the feelings coming. I was trying to work with the man,
With him.
because I
But
had
that's your
worked with
focus, yeah.
the man. Yeah.
So your focus was in that session to understand his experience around that particular topic or that content. But that was your focus. So he was saying things and doing things, and she got triggered and she started bringing up other issues. But that detracts from the mission that you're on in that moment,
Yeah.
right? And that so that but so what you're trying to do is focus on him, and she's as the pursuer, as is very typical, as Kasha I'm sure understands with the millions of interruptions that happen, is that the pursuer gets triggered. They're always trying to do something, right? And our job is to help them just calm down, right? It's softening, right? They're so busy doing, and they're not able to hear and listen and stay with their partner, even when their partner is trying really hard to attend to what's happening for them, right?
Mhm.
Right. And their minds work very, very fast relative to a withdrawer,
Yeah.
especially like a female pursuer. And so um, our job is to just soothe them for the moment. And there's different ways of doing that. And that could even just be if you have a good relationship with them, like putting your hand like in the air or on their knee or something like that. Or I know this is Zoom, but something attachment wise, and letting them know, I know this is really hard for you to hear, but we're focusing on him right now. Is it okay if we have a few minutes while we get underneath his experience right now? So that's just one example, but it can also be, oh, this is really hard for you to hear, right? And you're thinking about these other things, right? And those are really important, right? And we're gonna come back to them. Those that issue is also very valid and very important, right? Right now we're working on his experience. So it's this, like, you need to know what mission you're on, which is his experience. And anytime there's something that comes in the way, right? It's just give it a few moments, like a 5-second response, and then coming back to him.
So taking a brief time to validate that and then move back.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. That's the
Okay.
idea. So yeah, I mean, there's different kind of ways of thinking about it, but that's the idea. It's validating and coming back. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's why it's really important to have that blueprint of what am I doing right now? What I'm doing right now is working with him.
Okay. Okay.
And that's why I think it's if you're spending some of the session going back and forth and just following their current cycle, you're really just joining their cycle, right? You're not creating a shift to a new cycle, right? You're just kind of following their dance, and you're getting sucked into it. And your
Yeah.
job in EFT is to lead. Yeah, is to
Yeah.
lead, and you kind of know where you're going. You have the confidence to go, hey, I have faith that if we follow this process, that I can get deeper with one of them, right? Once I go deep enough, I ask them to turn to their partner. And remember too, the deepening is actually what's going to pull the partner in. The things that trigger her are going to be more higher order sort of statements, right? Things about her, right? But when things about her, or things that she's going to perceive as him pulling away or criticizing her, whatever it may be, about telling the story, sometimes he's telling it wrong, right? I want to tell you, or what he's describing is not important. What I'm describing is more important. So these are going to be things where um, she's reacting out of getting triggered herself, which is why the validating is important. But the quicker you can get him his primary experience to be shored up to the surface, she's not going to be interrupting anymore. It's really only those first few moments where you are, and this is where that neutral language can be really helpful when you're reflecting, because when he's saying something, on the one hand, you can go, oh, that could be really triggering. But if you're working with him, you're trying to get underneath it, you can even catch it ahead of time based on what he said and go, whoa, I bet you that could be really triggering. I know where your mind is going with this. Let's try to understand what he's saying. Let's try to go underneath it, right? Like you're already kind of preemptingly cutting it off. because you know based on your experience with her that might trigger her. But again, as you're trying to really understand, which is again not something right now she's able to do because right she's going to get triggered by it because it's about her, right? And it's because how initially he's going to respond is going to be the current cycle. So of course it's going to trigger her, right? And so you're trying to reflect in a neutral way and in a way to help him get underneath it. So, but as soon as she gets to see that more primary level of being, that's going to be a new experience, and she's going to be it'll in and of itself calm her nervous system down, because again it's her attachment figure that she loves, being in the world in a different way than what she's used to. And it's almost like magic to them sometimes, like, how are you getting him to share so much and be this open, you know? And that's where sometimes pursuers will ask, well, how are you doing that, right? And you go, yeah, you can do it too, right? And so he's going to give you the key to be able to do that, right? It's like, if we give him space, if we ask him what's coming up for him and he doesn't feel threatened, then all these emotions that you didn't know were inside of him do come out, right? But yeah, we have to give him that space, right?
Yeah. So after he sort of we did that enactment, and she, had a reaction to it. But then a few minutes later, excuse me, she talked about um, that the difficulty with her was that she was too independent, and that it was his fault because not in a negative way, but it was his fault because he had helped her after her divorce to become much more assertive and, to speak up for herself. And then he said, because she said she wanted to talk about that in the next session. And then he said, yes, but she takes it way too far sometimes. It's just over the top and it's just too much.
Mhm.
And so the session was coming
Plug it
to an
into a
end.
cycle. Plug it into a cycle.
Yeah, so I said that we
Yeah.
would address that in the next
Mhm.
session. And
So
her reactions are
how
so.
how would you talk about that?
How would
How
I?
would you, because how they're already talking about it. First she's asking you, I want to talk about it, and then it turns into a cycle, right in front of you, right in front of you in that moment.
Mhm,
She takes it too far. That's a very provocative statement, right?
yeah, yeah. And so, but we were at the end of the session, and yeah, that
Yeah, no,
was.
of course. So my question is, how would you, so say you had unlimited time,
Oh, okay.
how
Hmm.
would you, yeah, how would you start to get underneath it?
I would ask
What's
her,
your plan?
can you tell me a little bit more about that? Or can you tell me uh, what you think when that happens?
Hmm. When what happens?
When you feel that she takes it too far. What do you mean by that?
Hmm.
What does
Okay.
that mean for you?
Gotcha. So that's if you were working with him.
Mhm.
What about if you were working with her?
I would ask her, well, I would ask her sort of the same thing. Um, like, what do you mean by saying that you are sometimes um, too, you act too independent?
Hmm.
Um,
Now, can I ask you, in the end of a session, in the end of that session, did it feel like there was some emotion in the room?
there felt like there was some honesty, yeah, because really it was one of the first times that she had not admitted to being wrong, but discussed something about herself that she felt was maybe part of the cycle, right? Because
Mhm.
that's the first time she had identified something that she does as being part of the cycle. Because previously, everything was about what he did
Mm,
and her reactions to
mhm,
it,
mhm.
and she hadn't sort
Okay.
of discussed her
So
reaction.
I'll make my question a little bit more fine-tuned. So when he says she takes it too far, right?
Hmm.
How would you turn that into a starting point as an entry point with him or with her? So if he said it right there in that moment, and it was right in the beginning of the session.
I would just try to get underneath what that means for whichever one I was addressing.
So
Because
do
there's,
you need to get underneath if there's emotions, like live emotions in the room right now?
good question.
So, and when I say yes, you can get underneath and you can allow them to their primary emotions to catch up to to pay attention to what's there, but you don't need a meaning out of it, right? If they're already experiencing something, if he goes, she takes it too far,
Mhm.
that tells me most likely he's already triggered. You don't need to spend much time in the head. You can really just go, hey, what's coming up for you right now?
Mhm.
Do you notice yourself being triggered right now? Can
Okay.
you pay attention to that? Right? So you might have interpreted something she just said as triggering. Can you pay attention to that? What did you
Okay.
hear her say? Right? It's when she said this, okay, good. So we've got the trigger. And what did you hear her say? And what's that like right now? To notice that and
Okay.
just sit with it. It's there. It's if it's already there, it's the easiest work to do because then you're just giving it attention. You're not ignoring it. You're just going, what are you experiencing right now? You heard her say this thing, right? Do you remember what the trigger was, or not the trigger? What preceded him saying that statement? Was it just her saying,
It
you
was
know, I've
just,
become more independent. You've allowed me to be more independent.
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
So that's something about that's a trigger for him. We don't know. It needs to come from him. What did
Okay.
you hear from that, right? For you to make that state. And sometimes you react by making statements like like this. And that's a coping, right? And
Right.
that's part of your current cycle, or that's how you cope with this experience. Now tell me about this experience that you cope with by pointing out, you know, that she is going too far,
Okay.
you know, or pointing more generally, pointing out an interpretation through
So
a jab
something,
interpretation.
yeah. So he heard something that she said that made him
Mm.
say, but sometimes she takes it too far. And that
Not
was a
that
trigger.
made him say, but that he coped with an
Yeah.
experience by saying, yeah, right? It's never the other person's behavior, it's our interpretation, right? Our attachment interpretation, right? Which is not really about them. It's really more about us and about our past relationships. It
Right.
just gets projected onto their behavior in that moment. It's just
Okay.
unresolved stuff, right? If there's nothing unresolved, he can just see that for what it is, and in the way that maybe you would see it as a neutral third party, as maybe a positive statement, right? But then he gets triggered by it. So he's hearing something in that is a trigger for him. Right? Yeah. And that's the ears you want to have, that then allows you to be flexible to go from, okay, this is what we were talking about, but this is more alive. This is alive right now because it's happening right now in the room. I don't have to ask them, let's bring it in the room. It's already here.
Okay.
I just have to give it a little flashlight and put my attention on it.
Okay. I see.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. So
helpful.
it's a lot easier. Yeah.
That's very helpful. I
Yeah.
can, yeah, I see what you mean now.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Mhm. If we don't have that, then we go to, you know, describe what was this week like for you. Tell me about kind of moments where you were stuck, things that were not resolved this week, you know, all this kind of stuff. Like it's almost for the purpose of actually getting them triggered in the room. If we don't have that, then we ask questions, or we ask about these things. But we're trying to elicit from unresolved past moments. We're trying to elicit, right, experiences using their memory, using their cognition of placing themselves back in the room, and then going, can you feel that right now? But when it's there, and highly escalated couples, you really don't have to ask much about what happened during the week, because you're going to feel the energy. You can just ask them about what is this energy? What's happening right now? Like, you can really just go right into it if that's what you feel is happening.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
because when we first started the session, they were saying that the week hadn't been good and that they had been um, not really talking that much, but they'd been talking about breaking up, and then
Mhm.
they weren't sure if they wanted to come to session, and then they decided, well, yeah, they'd like to work on it, so they decided to come. And then he wasn't going to come to her place for a session, and then she said he showed up.
Right.
So it was nice to have them both in the room. It was really
Yeah.
nice. Yeah.
Well, even that there's a lot there, right? On the one hand, you had all these, you know, uh, apprehensions. You had a lot of, tough moments this week. You have a lot of deep, like, painful experiences that are making you feel quite hopeless, but you're here, right? On the positive end, not on the positive end, but on the attachment end. You're here. That means you care about each other. That means at least a part of you really wants to make this work, despite how hopeless you feel, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I did. I did talk
Yeah,
a little bit about that in the beginning.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
because it was
But
important.
but ultimately, we're here because there's a lot to work on, right? So let's dive in, right? So the more we can just dive in, that gives us, like, as much time as possible to create these change moments, right? The more of these enactments we can do, but again, it has to be alive, it has to be hot, it has to be ready to be passed over. It doesn't have to be perfect, and by any stretch, it just has to be felt. That's really the only prerequisite. It has to be felt. And if it's felt, then whether it's whatever the emotion is, or even if it's just the fear of sharing the emotion, that's all that's needed in order to share. Because think of any emotion that to make it really simple, any emotion that you would see a baby feeling, that's the emotions you want to hand over, right? Guilt is probably not one of those things that a baby would feel. So that might make it really easy. It's really going to be hurt. It's really going to be sadness. It is really going to be fear. That's like the main three. That's different than what they're sharing now. That's the new cycle that you're trying to create. Um, and then once they can do that, first in the session, then consistently themselves outside of the session without your assistance, then they're going to come in and talk about these success stories about how they were able to catch and repair and not have fights, or had the fight but then were able to kind of catch themselves, and all these kinds of stories. And that's how now you can enact all these positive things that they've noticed they were able to do, their partner were able to do. If you ask them a question like, how confident do you feel that if this was to come up, even under stress, that you can handle it on your own? Okay, now you're ready for stage 2 stuff. Right? Those are all great indicators that, while they understand their cycle, they can talk about it, they can talk about what used to happen compared to what happens now. And, it doesn't mean fights don't happen, but just that they can repair from them. And now they're able to do the deeper work that's gonna, the kind of more generalized work that we're kind of saying, we don't do that until there's consistency, safety built in.
Okay.
Yeah. So we got
Yeah.
to crawl before we walk, before we run.
Yeah. No, I really like that advice and description about staying staying with that feeling and making it so that it's live and it's more hot
Yeah,
before. Yeah. Doing that.
yeah. And I think the main thing to focus on is attunement, right? In the same way that if it was your client, your individual client was there, and you have a really good connection to them, that's what you're trying to recreate, essentially, except you've got the other partner there. So it seems like it's a distraction in a way, and it feels like that sometimes maybe. But despite that's there, we want to attune to the individual. But then, of course, if the other partner is highly dysregulated, that's where we need to just quickly attune to them in order to come back to whatever our mission was. Yeah. And sometimes it's too hard, and then we have to give them some extra soothing. Or maybe we go to them and we go, okay, we abandon our mission of working with one partner, and now we're going to go to the other partner because they're just not able to stay with us and the process of working with their partner. And that's okay, right? But we also need to also acknowledge that that's what's happening. Because if we're abandoning one partner for the other, essentially, for that session, we have to be able to say, look, this is really hard for you today. Let's focus on you, right? And then when you are able to get them to enact and then have their partner be there, then when you zoom out and you're providing the summary, it's important to be able to appreciate a partner you abandoned, to acknowledge how hard certain aspects were for the person you switched over to, all that kind of stuff. Like, it's important to include that in your summary, and then next time to start with the person you abandoned, I think. Or if, of course, if you've got an 80-minute session, maybe you're able to do an enactment on both sides, which I think would be ideal. Whatever happens in the end, you just kind of summarize whatever happened, because you want them to both know that and that you're reflecting that back and making that explicit, and that, hey, even if you have a not great session, the point is you're following the experience, you're following so the key of what I'm trying to say is the attunement, right? You've got the attunement of you with both of them individually, and then just kind of the attunement of you're following their dance, you're following their cycle, and going, you know what, today the cycle won. I really like the language in that podcast of like, it's always against the cycle, and either their new cycle wins or their old cycle wins. Or in other words, if you lose to the cycle, whether they're losing to the cycle at home, you're losing to the cycle today because you couldn't do an enactment, or their attachment won, their experience won today, their goal of moving towards a new cycle. They worked hard to be able to stay with their own experience and their partner's experience, and that's what won, right? And so, either the process wins or the cycle wins, the process being EFT. And it's okay, sometimes it doesn't, right? But it is important to acknowledge that it's sometimes it does happen, right? That doesn't mean that's going to happen next time, right? You're more equipped, given that session, it's still whatever it is, it's still helpful information, because then you can go back and go, what could I have done better to help the process win this time? And maybe there wasn't. Maybe there's just so much in their world that even if you're your best self that day, and you've been working for 50 years with EFT, there's just something in them. There's just too many variables that didn't allow you to beat the cycle that day, and that's okay too. It's just being able to acknowledge that.
Okay. Thank you so much for all that. That's really helpful. I really can see that now, what you talked about. Yeah, I can really see it. And good to know for next time.
Attunement, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Attunement's a big one, right? Because if you're attuned, clients can feel that, right? Like if you're attuning to a particular client and their experience is what wins out, is what comes to the surface, right? Whereas if you're in your head and you're trying to do a million different things, right, that takes away from your ability to attune. You do good work if you're just attuning. When you have the goal of one person deepening their experience and having that be really felt in the moment, the goal's really clear, right? You're just doing basically Rogerian therapy and really just connecting, right? And then when you have it, it's live, then the cycle comes back up, or the process of EFT comes back up, where you're like, okay, it's hot now. I have to think of what to do. I have to gauge, right? How ready are they to do this now? Like, how am I going to package it up for them to share? You know, is the other partner ready to receive? Then you have to go to your head. But just the work of attuning is quite straightforward. I think most therapists know how to do that if they get out of their own way. There's no needing a blueprint, right? You're just connecting, you're just reflecting, you're just really being there with them, and really them getting that experience of being heard, right? That's what builds in safety for them to like just feel what's going on.
Yeah, because when that cycle starts up, they don't get heard.
Only hurts, no heard. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
And then labeling it, and then that just ejects you from attunement for the moment, right? Go, oh, that's not good. Let's validate. Let's go. It makes sense why you're getting triggered right now, and we're gonna get to you. I promise. But if you can follow through with that promise, but we're gonna get to you after. I'm gonna note. We're gonna kind of park that for a moment. We will come back to it, even if not today. It'll always come up, right? When we move to you, if you don't feel like it's been addressed, please do feel free to bring it up, this kind of stuff. But right now we're focusing on the other partner, right? And that's attunement too, because you're like fighting for their experience, right? As you would do for the other partner if the other one was going to interrupt when your mission is to work with them. It's no different, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
One of the podcasts I was listening to for the leading edge was talking about um, when you do an enactment, or you ask somebody to do an enactment, and then it's not a good idea to say to them, how was that for you? How did that make you feel? They were talking about not
Oh,
saying that to the person who's
yeah.
doing the
Who
enactment, which
shared?
was interesting. Yeah, how was that like to share? Yeah,
Yeah.
say that.
Yeah. And the reason for that is the continuity of attachment. We don't want to process it until it's done. And part of enacting is both sides have to enact, like almost like you're not there. One does the sharing. They want to in real time see how their partner's responding, right? It's not a black and white rule. It's more if they're on the leading edge, or they're doing something that's very difficult, like it's a leap of faith, like the trust fall, right? If someone's doing a trust fall, they don't want to like halfway through the trust fall, how is that like to do the trust fall? Well, they haven't been caught yet. I think that's a good analogy. So let their partner catch them, let their partner respond, then you can go back and go, what was that like for you to share? What was it like to have your partner be there? Then you can tease it up and process it for as long as you want, right? And that's the key. You go as deep as you can, you share as deep as they're comfortable, and then you get the partner to respond, let their nervous system calm down, let all that happen, all the magic happen. Then you can switch over to another mode, which is processing. Yeah, I 100% agree with that.
What if the partner's response is not what the enacting person wanted to hear?
What they needed to hear, yeah.
They needed to,
Um,
yeah.
that's where the concept of catching the bullet comes in, right? So we talked about that before. There's whole podcasts and topics on that idea. But catching the bullet is both from a expressor side of things. You can catch the bullet, meaning you can catch it halfway. If you notice it's not going to be shared well, you can go, like just this week, I did an enactment, and I didn't feel like the male partner was really there. I felt it with him when me and him were looking at each other. I felt it. And then I think I didn't feel it, but also he didn't use the words that he had just used a second before with me about fear, about being scared to share with her. He said, we talked about him using it sort of in the future tense, which is what fear is, right? And then when I get him to share, he goes, and I explored what he's afraid of too with him. And then when I got him to turn it, and I think he said something like, so first he said, he didn't use the word fear. He said, oh, when I share like this is what you do, which is very different than, and I go, oh, hold on. Let's take a step back, right? And I didn't tell him he did it wrong or anything like that, even though I'm indicating that with hold on. Instead, I just said to him, hey, let's try again. And this time, let's make it future oriented. Let's use the word we used. Let's use fear or scared, or even if that doesn't sit right with you, I expect or I anticipate, but I'm giving him the words, and that's okay. And so I couldn't feel it fully, but also it was past tense. This is what you've done, this, right? So now I've got him to do it again. And so before, this is more not really about your question. Your question is more about the responder. But first we have to increase the likelihood that the expressor is gonna share vulnerably, which requires them to feel it and also to use, in this case, future-oriented language, so to the language that will reduce the likelihood of the other person being triggered, right? So so it should match mostly how they shared with you, because the whole idea is you're passing it hot, meaning you're feeling it. It seems like they're ready to share. And then if you're getting them to share and it's not coming across in a very vulnerable way, it's okay to say, hey, hold on. Whoa, what's going on? Maybe we went too deep. Can you share it like this? If not, what's going on? Is it hard? Yeah, it's really hard. And they might not even be conscious of it. They might just go into this autopilot. The moment they looked in their partner's eyes, this is what got blurted out, and that's okay. It's hard to share it like this, isn't it? The way I'm asking you to share it. Yeah, it really is. Yeah. Right. And I've just saved a bad enactment, or I've just saved the other partner getting triggered, right? That's why we call it catching the bullet. And it's a proactive approach, and if you can do it, great. But if not, it's okay, because as long as we note it in our head and we address it, right? Because then when it doesn't go well, we go, oh, what did you hear? Oh, it's when they said it like this. This is what was the trigger, right? So that's where it's really, again, about attuning and what just happened and slowing down. And also a good rule of thumb is to make the enactment really short. The shorter it is, the more likely it is to succeed. And when it doesn't succeed, you're able to find out why, because it's just 3, 4, 5 words. A good enactment is, I think they even said, under 6 words. That's a good enactment. The other partner was there throughout the whole content piece of it. They just need to see the experience, the primary experience, with very few words. That's all, right? Just to complete the kind of this positive cycle that confirms this is what they're going through. Not me looking at my partner, looking at the therapist. They look really vulnerable to the therapist, but when it comes to looking at me, I need to see that be confirmed. And then, but again, I think we've talked about it before as well, but when it's shared, and for you, if you feel it was very vulnerable, sometimes it still doesn't land well. And that's, I think, what you're talking about. When it's shared really vulnerably, but there isn't a good response, I'd be really curious. What did the receiver hear? What did they hear? Did they hear the vulnerability in the partner in the moment, or did they hear something else? And if they didn't respond well, 99.9 out of 100 times, they heard something else. So I'm curious, what did they hear? Were they present for that? Or were they somewhere else? Were they hearing all the past moments that, like, were they in an event from last week, right? And I usually break that down into, and we can talk about this more in depth next time, but I break it down into the two sides. One part of you was here, was able to hear them. Tell me about that part first. It felt good. And then another part, a lot of resistance came up. Now talk to me about that part. Talk to me about both parts. So first, the good part, the one that did connect to it, then have them share that back to their partner. And then I always come back to that other part. Now the expressing partner is going to be able to hear the not so good part, but they need to hear the good part first, right? So in the same way of passing it hot, I want to pass the receiving partner's experience hot as well, meaning positive. I want them to express the positive part back of their two sides, if there is a split kind of experience. And then after that's done, and we summarize it, and we go back to the expressor and we go, what was that first part like to hear? It felt really good, but I'm really interested in this other part that they're really, we're triggered by. I want to hear more about that too. And then again, then we don't enact the bad part, but again, a bad is a relative term. We don't enact the part that was not heard well, but what we do is we go back to the expressor and go, does that make sense? Does that make sense how there's these two parts? The first part, let's say they haven't heard this in 20 years. They really wanted to believe it. It was really hard for them to hear. So that part of them that couldn't let it in was creating a block that made it really hard. And we're talking about over time, if this was consistent, then it'll be easier for them to let it in. Okay, well, that's a lot different than there's only one part and it's bad, right? That's what reactions are. Reactions are it's only bad. There's no good in it. So by slowing it down, we can tease apart what was received and what was the barrier of it just being a good experience and not a bad one. And in the beginning, you'll get those. You'll get these mixed experiences. And as long as you're curious about it, and as long as you pass it hot, those are less likely to occur. But when they do occur, then at least it's not because of how the person expressing, it's not about how they shared. It's more about how the person received.
How they received
which
it.
means, yeah. So if you do your job well, then you're really only working with the receiver at that point, for the sake of the expressor, because they need to hear exactly what it is that the other person received. They need to know that what they shared, if it was vulnerable, that's good. They have permission to keep doing that. They need that to be a reinforcing experience, or else they're gonna, especially if it's a withdrawer, they're gonna climb back up and go in their bubble and just be like, well, this is why I don't share.
Yeah.
Because when I try to be vulnerable, it doesn't work, and it leads to pain, right? But if you can get that first part of the receiver to say, yeah, I've been waiting for this for 20 years, and it's frustrating to only get it now. Okay, let's talk about that. So this is what you've been wanting to hear for 20 years. Can you let them know that? Okay. And so that part feels good. Okay, but you wish this could have happened 20 years ago. Okay. That's understandable too, right?
Yeah.
So something prevented them from being able to do that 20 years ago. Probably had nothing to do with you, or very little to do with you. So yeah. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Because I was asking that because the expressor then said, well, you something about I didn't like your body language or something when she received it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And that's we have to pay attention to everything. Good signals and signals that are not reinforcing, like the body language that he's talking about. Because when you're opening yourself up as a withdrawer, you're so acutely aware of the other person's body language. The moment it's closing up, you don't take any more risks.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And that may have been partly because I did it too soon and it wasn't hot enough. And that's why it faltered, I think.
Well, yeah, possible. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, we really want to honor when But also at the same time, if he got rejected for a not very vulnerable expression, he's also not as exposed to get hurt, because you can only get hurt to the extent that you're opening up. So that's the other piece, right? It would be
True.
really, really hard if he opened himself up. It was very, very vulnerable, and then she did the same thing. It would be a completely different experience, right? And so that's where, if you really see a risk, you really want to honor that, because if there isn't at least a very clear understanding of why it didn't go well, it's going to be very difficult to get them to risk again.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. We'll leave it there. All right.
Thanks
Thanks,
so
guys.
much. Thanks for joining,
Thanks,
Kasha.
Sam.
You
Bye, guys.
have a question, Kasha?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Kasha.
Sorry, this is not, that was wonderful, and I've taken so many notes. So thank you so much, Ofir and Anne, for providing the case. I actually have an ethical question that's just very urgent. So I don't know if you can just take 3 minutes to discuss it briefly, because I will have to take an action on it soon. But after last,
Should I stop the recording here?
yeah, I think probably that's